a Playlyst original.
Welcome to the Pilot Podcast,
where we review the pilot episodes of TV shows to answer your question, should I watch this?
My name is Mitu.
And my name is BJ.
And this week, we're watching Dune Prophecy on HBO and on Max. So shout out to the nerds who recommended it.
And stay tuned to find out if Mitu would join the Bene Gesserit.
Whoa. Big question. Even bigger answers. Until then, why don't I tell you what happened in this one?
Please let us know what happens.
10,000 years before the ascension of Paul Atreides, this show follows two Harkonnen sisters, Valya, played by Emily Watson, and Tula, played by Olivia Williams, as they combat forces that threaten the future of humankind and establish the fabled sect that will become known as the Bene Gesserit.
So, Mitu, let's start with the big question. Do you think people need to be familiar with Dune, either the books or the two movies that have come out recently?
I would say, as someone who is unfamiliar, which I assume is why you're posing this question, there should be some level of buy-in for this story. I don't know that you would want to jump in just straight into this show without some of the fun of watching the movie, because then you know a little bit about how some of these conflicts will play out. Or I imagine even more interest from the books, because I think Book Hive, which you're part of, are fairly satisfied with some of the portrayals in the movie and in the series so far. So I think the familiarity is less of being confused about what's happening and more about having some buy-in and some interest in the characters.
I think that's very reasonable. It definitely helps to have seen the movies or to have read some of the books. There's also another novel that this is inspired by, but not based on directly, Sisterhood of Dune, and it gives you a little more context, which I think they spend a lot of this episode trying to establish what the purpose of this sisterhood is, what they're trying to do, and if you don't know where that leads to 10,000 years later, it might not be as interesting from the start.
Which is where I found myself, because I kind of remember Dune when I watched it many moons ago, but I don't remember the plot that closely. And so I found myself in this episode getting a little tired of being like, okay, I get it. These are all the different families. These are all the different fights. I kind of wanted to just get right into the fighting.
Interesting, because those internal politics, the different houses, these big families across the empire, that's going to be there for the next 10,000 years.
That makes sense. It feels very Game of Thrones in that sense. And I understand people making that comparison because it is just seeing what you understand to be lineages fighting for power. That these will be fights that sustain on throughout this story for thousands and thousands of years.
And we see the names that some of us are really familiar with, like the Harkonnens, the Atreides. We hear about the Emperor. And I think this is interesting because it leads into some of the world building and the lore behind things. Like we're seeing the sisterhood before they become the Bene Gesserit. And we're hearing more about the Thinking Machine War, which really changes the culture of the Dune universe post-war.
And we see the deployment of the Voice.
Yes, we're starting to see these powers, like being able to control people, evolving beyond lie detectors. This is why we get people like the Mintax, the human computers, because we can't have calculators in this world after a calculator tried to kill us all.
Absolutely not. You need an abacus and your mind.
Literally, that is the direction everyone moves towards. Like, let's evolve the human mind to be more powerful.
How do you feel about some of the inter and intra conflict? Because I found myself rooting for Valya, despite the fact that I wasn't sure if I agreed with everything she was doing. I was rooting for her from the perspective of she's really taken it from all sides, because there are people among the Bene Gesserits that don't necessarily agree with her, And then she's also having to figure out, how do I maintain power for this sect across this kingdom?
I really enjoyed those conflicts. Like you, I'm also rooting for Valya. And I'm glad she at least has her sister Tula supporting her while trying to throw in some questions of, should we be doing this? But it's interesting to see her rise from power because we see her a little bit younger and then the older version where she becomes Mother Superior. And at times it's hard to understand why she so faithfully believes this mission that she's been given. But then at the same time, I respect that she says, I have a goal and I will achieve it. And everyone around me will either help or be gone.
There's something about a woman with a hobby, a woman with a passion. And if her passion includes using the voice to get people to slit their own throats in order to establish what she needs, I'm sorry, but I just have to support how steadfast she is in achieving what she needs to achieve.
You know, breeding the entire human society and the leaders in that society is not something I ever considered as a possible hobby.
You weren't thinking big enough. But then, because you weren't thinking big enough, in your world, you wouldn't have Timmy Tim to show up 10,000 years later.
Yes, we are seeing the little birth of the project that leads to Paul Atreides, who, slight spoiler, is that kind of next evolution in humanity that these women want.
So I'm sorry, but I have to go all the way behind Valya for this. To quote Karen Huger, I'm a soldier for Valya.
Because Timothy is the result that convinced you?
Well, because we have such great story coming out of it 10,000 years later.
I think that is an interesting prospect. We have like a quick time skip. We're over 100 years since this war, so we've seen people trying to reset society, but we're still over 10,000 years away from the story of Dune, which I wonder how many connections they're going to try to make, because that's a big gap to really reach for.
Yeah.
And it also gives them a lot more freedom because they can be like, none of these people will be around later.
Maybe that is a sweet spot, actually, where you can Easter egg a couple things and then otherwise be like, remember when everyone crip walked from kingdom to kingdom? And it's just like, it's okay. We don't have to keep that 10,000 years later. We can just say they evolved out of it.
And they actually kind of play off of that in the opening where they're talking about history and prophecy and how sometimes history isn't true. So they could really do a lot of things here and be like, people just forgot or changed the story 10,000 years later.
That's true. Man, that must be very freeing for that creative department. The other thing, though, is I want to warn my fellow babies, this show is violent.
There's murder, double murder, triple murder.
Of a very, let's say, vulnerable victim.
Everyone was vulnerable. They were all just chilling.
But there was an especially vulnerable victim that
Yes.
I was like, oh, okay. Now I really understand the Game of Thrones comparisons.
Someone who was just seeking comfort, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The answer was no.
Nope, got cooked instead.
They said, we can't have you around here. Mm-mm.
We're trying to speak so broadly to not give spoilers, but I was surprised by that one. That one really did make me think of Game of Thrones, because on Game of Thrones, they were willing to kill anyone.
And I think the different murders show people's conviction to their missions and hobbies. And it opens up some questions, which I think are really interesting for the broader story, because we have some suspicious characters like Desmond Hart, who seems to be like a soldier who shows up unexpectedly. And I'm still questioning Princess Nezzy. She's very excited about being in the sisterhood, but she's also the daughter of the Empress, so she holds a lot of power.
Yes, and you see in the beginning where she's trying to like finesse a better dorm room, and they're like, no, girl, all nuns sleep on bunk beds. It is what it is. So that will be interesting how independent she is, because that is a threat to Valya. She does not like when the girls are too independent of thinkers. With Princess Nezzy and with Desmond, those are two characters that I felt I wanted to see more action around because they built good intrigue around these two. But instead, I feel like we focused more on like giving backstory.
Very backstory heavy. They do hint that Nezzy is combat ready. We see her training. So hopefully she'll have some good action scenes. I'm not sure who she's going to fight, though. But there is also hints at other intra-conflicts somewhere in the Imperium.
Somewhere out there.
Somewhere in space, someone is unhappy that there is one man in charge of everyone.
Well, will you keep watching Dune Prophecy on HBO and on Max to understand who out there might be a little ticked off at this dude in charge of everything?
I will. I really enjoyed the Dune books. I actually haven't watched Dune Part 2, the movie yet, but I do like this world. And I'm really interested in, for me, the backstory and lore. That is appealing because I want to see how they set everything up and lay the groundwork for what we know about the future. How do you feel?
As someone who is not Dune Hive, I will not keep watching this show. I understand why y'all like it. Please, Dune Hive, be gentle with me. But I think you need to have some buy-in from the movies first to then go into this show. And for me, I just watched the first movie. I thought it was nice, but not enough to bring me into this lore.
Watch the movie.
That's BJ using the voice. Where would you use the voice if you had it? If you had the ability to make people do something?
Right now, just make you keep watching the show.
Wow. Thinking small again.
What would you do? Crime?
Like, what? No.
Okay, what would you do?
I would do like my partner and I were talking about this, where he was like, if we were on a patio of a restaurant eating and the table next door is chain smoking, he'd be like, stop smoking. So then our air is no longer polluted and we can enjoy our meal in peace. And potentially he has saved someone from a pretty unhealthy habit.
By forcing them to do what you want on what's probably the smoking area of this restaurant.
Yeah, the patio is definitely where people tend to be more allowed to smoke.
But y'all would say,
Not on this patio, not when we have these voices.
So I guess that answers my question. You would join the Bene Gesserit just to pick up that skill.
I'd want the voice, but I wouldn't want any other responsibility. So that's what's hard. I don't think you can join the Bene Gesserit and like cherry pick what you want from it. I think you got to go all in, and I don't want nothing else to do with it.
And we see them training to be truth sayers, and they would pick up on your true intentions for sure.
I'm not a good liar. So no, it's not for the best for me.
Well, maybe that's for the best. I don't think you should be controlling people with the voice.
I like to be one of the girls. I'm not one of those girls. I don't think I'm strong enough.
Hey, believe in yourself. You could do it if you wanted to.
But I don't want to.
And that's okay too.
Okay. Where can people find more episodes of the Pilot Podcast if they want to listen to more?
If you want to, of your own free will, head to thepilotpodcast.com or follow us on all of your favorite podcast platforms.
You can also follow us on social media at The Pilot Pod, and you can send thoughts, feelings, show recommendations, because every other week, just like this one, we do a show recommended by you, our wonderful listeners, and whether you would join the Bene Gesserit to askthepilotpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Bye.